We have an economy, as I will show, total personal income at the state is sort of driving the overall budget, not only of education, but healthcare and corrections and the like. And what you see in this chart is that, that we have in the United States a phenomenon that's not unlike the 99-1 inequality that's been playing out at the individual household level. It's also playing out at a state level. And so what you can see here, going back to 1969, and we've got personal income growing, personal income per capita growing in these various states. You've got 5 states here that have really just pulled away from the pack, and those are going to be states that have benefited from the tech boom. They've benefited recently from the financial sector expansion, and they've benefited from the military-industrial complex. So if you're in those places, Massachusetts and Washington D.C. and New York, you're running away, and you can see that they've left the rest of us behind. And in particular, you can see Oregon in this last decade got that little bit of a dip. We've just had a miserable decade for income growth. Essentially, one recession that started the decade, another recession to end the decade, and kind of a wimpy expansion in the middle that we in Oregon didn't participate in the way that the rest of the country did. So why is that important? That's important because, and I showed this chart last year, but in the hypothesis on billboards is you have to see it 7 times until you've seen it. So I'm going to show it at least 6 more times, and then the 6 next times that I come to visit. This is the share of total personal income that goes to government services of all kinds in Oregon. And what this tells me is, you look at the top one, state and local taxes and fees as a share of that total personal income. And then if we take out the fees and we just look at taxes, both of those lines are relatively straight, although if you look at the tax line, it's coming down to the 90s some. And I look at that chart and I say, whether or not Oregonians really know it, they kind of set a budget in their mind that of all the money that we have collectively in total personal income, we're spending about 16 cents in taxes and fees to fund all the different kinds of public services that you can think of, from schools to corrections to police to libraries to parks to whatever. And we're spending about 10 cents, and it's actually kind of slipped below 10 a little bit, through taxes. As you get a bigger gap between those two, I would say you're moving a little bit more toward an a la carte government, where you have to pay for what you use. More service development charges and park fees and tuition at colleges, instead of broad-based public support through taxation. The one piece to pay attention to here, and I'm sure it'll end up in Tim's conversation as well, is that dip in the 90s is coming down as the implementation of property tax limitations, which did bring us down. It did impact education funding, and has pulled us down into a well below average taxing state as a share of total personal income. So if you have a fixed share of income going to public services, but you have aspects of public services that are growing faster than income, then by definition the gravity of the situation means that that something has to give. And so this is the trade-off. What we're showing here on the bottom is Medicaid, human services, and public safety as a share of total personal income in Oregon. You can see start to take off in 1987. You had expanding coverage and health cost inflation, other human services also driving the cost of Medicaid. And then in public safety, just a growing appetite on the public's behalf to put more and more people behind bars in a way that's gone way beyond So that has meant, given the one that I just showed you, if we have a fixed constraint and we've got one part of government growing faster than the economy, another part of government's got to give, and it's been K-12 and higher education. Big declines in higher education in terms of the broad support, and essentially a transfer from public subsidy of higher education to private tuition, paying for tuition in our colleges and universities. So now let's take a quick look at the general and lottery fund trends. Here you can see the growing, so this is general lottery fund going 1999 up through the governor's budget proposal. So I've stuck the governor's budget proposal here, 2013-15. We'll go one more. This is the, because it's kind of hard to see that trend, but here's the overall growth in the general fund. All programs growing at a little bit more than 3%. So that's total growth on an average annual basis. You can see that education as an endeavor overall grew at about 2%. The K-12 state school fund grew a little bit faster than that. It fared better than higher education and community college funding. But you can see those human services and public safety and judicial. And the point is the previous chart that I showed, that was sort of that was a macro view of what was going on. The trade-offs, the trade-offs between public safety and human services against education are largely taking place in Salem, and that's where the big trade-offs within government have happened. Because if I go back and I look at all the other kinds of service that state and local governments provide, be they parks, police, fire, libraries, etc., you don't see trade-offs like that. We're spending about the same share of the economy on those services today as we were back in 1977. So the trade-offs have really been executed in the capital through the general fund. So what do we have to look forward to? That was a relatively tame economic and demographic environment that we were living through as we made a lot of those trade-offs. And what I'm going to say is we're marching into a period that is more challenging than the one that we just came out of. This is a demographic profile of the general fund. So the orange lines are how much do we spend per person in the general fund by age group. So you can see that our general fund spending tends to be, it's concentrated in youth, in education services. It then gets quite low in that sort of middle-aged piece, and then up about maybe 70 to 75, it starts to pick up again, in particular with long-term care Medicaid spending. So that's how general fund spending plays out. General fund revenue, which is heavily concentrated in the income tax, has a completely different dynamic. We have some child labor going on. I don't know exactly how but you can see it picks up and peaks at 55 and then starts to come down in terms of, and that's right in line with labor force theory. Peak earnings tend in there at about 55, and people start to scale back a little bit. So the overarching issue, without getting into too much detail here, is that in the last, if I think of the last 30 years, we had quite a bit of population growth in this middle part here, where what I would call the revenue positive part of this chart, demographically. As I look 30 years into the future, we got a lot of growth up here, and the growth in the middle is not as fast. We don't have a whole lot, we're not projecting big, huge growth in the child population, which is actually, that is one kind of little bit of silver lining for school forecasts, is that we don't have a big bulge of kids coming at us that we're trying to deal with. But we do have, obviously, big increases here, and these increases not growing as fast as those. This is just a chart because I'm so tired of the corrections budgets and the politics around it. This is the cost-benefit ratio of an additional dollar spent on incarceration. And I would say back in 1994, there was an argument because we didn't have capacity. Folks were being sentenced and then released early, etc. So one could make an argument back in the 90s that some additional spending on incarceration was cost beneficial, but we've taken that down to a dollar of spending gets you a dollar of benefit, which you might say, oh well, that's not too bad, but there's an awful lot of other investments, particularly in education, in K-12 and early education, that can get you a whole lot more than a dollar for a dollar. And in this day of austerity and scarcity, we've got to be a lot smarter than we have been. So that's one little piece of ammunition as you sit down and you try to think, how do you slow down that correction spending and get politicians to make tough decisions, very tough decisions, because these are tough. You make a decision here on sentencing, and it doesn't really pay you anything today. It's you make a sentencing decision, it may not help you in today's budget, it might help you 5 or 6 years from now as that sentencing reform takes effect. So it's a very politically courageous decision to make, and one that hasn't been made very well. All right, PERS. I have this chart and I have one more chart, and PERS is a tough one. So we introduced this topic last year at this summit in Woodburn, and I remember Val Boyle was here, and she was surprised at the time that we had a PERS problem because it had been very quiet. We had PERS reform in 2003. The rates were not what you'd want them to be, and the payroll rates being paid by school districts weren't ideal, but they weren't causing headlines. And now all of a sudden, everybody's talking about it again. So what is going on, and why did 2003 fix our problems, and why are we back talking about this again? So this is a chart that I think, in the simplest sense, describes why we have the problem we have. And you have to step back for just a second. And I think City Club, I don't know if anyone has looked at the City Club report that they put out a year and a half ago or so. They did a wonderful job sort of teeing it up and putting it in context. And basically what they said is they stepped back and they said, look, according to financial experts, you're going to want somewhere between 80 to 85% of the salary that you earn during your working years in your retirement years. And they come in at a lower level because expenses go down, and some folks have paid off their mortgages and those. So that 80 to 85% is about what financial advisors would still tell you today. In Oregon's traditional formula defined benefit program, a traditional standard defined benefit package, delivers, for somebody who works 30 years, delivers 50% replacement. But the individual is also eligible for Social Security. That is not the case in every state and locality across the United States, the majority, but not everybody. Social Security gives you another 30%. So the idea would be that if you had the regular formula and you got your 50%, and then you were eligible for Social Security, you got another 30%, you're in that 80% zone, and that was kind of the idea that people had back in the 70s and 80s as an adequate state pension plus the federal pension. Well, you can see what happened here, and let's focus on the blue, because I'm trying to keep this in the context of people who have worked their entire careers. If you're going in and out, you're getting pensions from other places. But the blue line shows you for full-time employees what the replacement rate was only from the state portion of the pension. They're getting Social Security in addition to this. And you can see that those going out in 2000, 2001 had replacement rates coming out of the state pension that peaked at 100%. And that is, I mean, we could have a whole afternoon session on the money match and the guaranteed 8% return, et cetera, but that's what's driving that. And those folks who started their careers in 1970 and ended them in 2000, 30 years later, with that wild run-up in the stock market in the 1990s, plus guaranteed 8% when the stock market crashed, etc. They rode that wave, and they ended up with, some of them with a pension on the day that they retired that was in excess of their last paycheck, and then they became eligible for Social Security. That's an expensive system. We still have people coming out, about half of the retirees are coming out under money match. It is coming down. That is about the rate of replacement that your current money match 30-year retirees are coming out with today, about 74%. So they're getting 74 plus 30 to get to about 104 if they're full-time employees. So very expensive system. There's nothing like this. Money match was, I think, by everybody's, it was misunderstood, an accident. Nobody knew necessarily what was happening, but it's a problem that we have, and it's a problem that nobody else in the rest of the country has in the same way. So this is what happens to system rates when the liabilities of a program like Money Match drive up. The cost of the system, we have rules that say the pension system has to be funded at some level. If the stock market's not doing it for us, the public employers, the school districts, the municipalities, etc., they have to increase their contributions into the system. It is assessed as a share of their payroll. And this is a projection of where that is headed under different assumptions of what the market does over time. So you can see worst case scenario is long-term markets at 4.5%. Right now, the actuaries still at an 8% expectation of long-term stock market, and you can see it under a 10.5 scenario as well. But let's focus on the green, the green rate of return. You can see those going from 15% of payroll up to 25. If you assume a 7.25 rate of return, it could get up to 30. So those rates, those payroll rates, are well above what school districts and municipalities have been used to paying. There is a sort of a bill on the table right now for PERS that if the legislature doesn't act, rates relative to this last school year will go up by 7 percentage points. They go up on 7 percentage points up against a combined payroll across all school districts of $2.8 billion. So it's 7 percentage points of $2.8 billion. That would cost districts, if nobody acts, $200 million a year in combination, or $400 million for the biennium. So the question sort of before the legislators right now and the governor is, how much do you want to buy that down with some kind of reform? The governor has advanced COLA restrictions that would primarily hit money match retirees. But here's a rule of thumb. For every percentage point you bring down the PERS rate, translates to 300 teachers across the state of Oregon. So proposals, I think the governor's proposal is in and around a 4 to 5 percentage point reduction if you implemented his policy. There are other options out there that go beyond what the governor has proposed with respect to the COLA that could end money match going forward, and or make a technical change to the way that money match is calculated that would essentially end money match going forward. You could get maybe 3 to 4 more percentage points of savings if you added that in. So the real question here is, I guess, two questions. One, do you do anything at all as the legislature sits down and convenes and thinks about that? And if you decide to go march into this, what's your goal in terms of bringing those rates down? If If you address the COLA, you can address the COLA now, you can address the COLA 2 years from now. If you let more money match retirees retire under money match, you can't ever get them back. The horse is out of the barn. So there's a few money match, sort of the tail of the money match retirees could be stopped. If you wait a couple of years or 3 or 4 years, that option's not going to be out there anymore because they will retire. So it's a big one. It's a big political, I think the technicians all know what they would do when they sit down and they look at that 80% replacement rates. A technician could sit down, if this were a benevolent dictatorship, we'd have an answer and you just move on. This is a political process though, and it's a much more challenging and interesting conversation. So with that, I'll pause here for questions.
I have a question on this subject, just so I understand. So when you say contribution to payroll,
Yeah.
And it's at the green line's at 25%, so that means that like our school district is paying on average 25% of its total payroll in PERS cost. Is that what that means?
Yeah, this is actually system-wide. So school districts actually pay, that includes the municipalities and the fire districts and all that kind of. School districts actually pay a slightly higher rate than that.
Of course.
And depending on the school district that you're in, they may also pay an additional rate to pick up the members' contributions. So there's this so-called pickup program. PPS does not do a pickup, but many other school districts do. So in one that would, you would take whatever your rate is here and you'd add 6 percentage points to it.
And so as we've, in just school districts, as we've lost teachers because of budget cuts, what does that do to our school district's contribution rate? Does that impact the percentage? Does it increase the percentage because you have less?
Yeah, you still have a liability out there to pay that is indifferent to how many people you're employing. So if your payroll's shrinking and going down, I still have a bill.
Right.
That because you had all these people from the past, money match retirees that have to pay. So.
Quick question on the very first chart.
Yeah.
Are those dollar figures current dollars for each year, or are they inflation adjusted? And if so, what's the inflation adjustment?
There is no inflation adjustment. So that's why I put out the annual average growth rates, and you can think about what inflation's been over the past. You know, inflation's been 2 to 3%, so you've had a little bit of real growth over that period.
So effectively, general administration has actually gone down in real value.
Yes. Well, in nominal.
Nominal, yeah, nominal.
Yeah, absolutely.
One more question.
You say it's a political decision down in Salem,
Yep.
how this issue is handled.
Yes.
I would assume that most constituents in Oregon are not part of the PERS system.
Right.
So the public employee unions are creating the conflict for our elected representatives as to whether or not they should support reform that benefits their constituents?
Yes, with an argument that that this was a contractual agreement, that we signed up for a plan. These were the rules that we understood them, and you made a promise to pay us this. You're a low-tax state. You can afford it.
Well, we know we can't afford it.
What's that?
We know we can't afford it without a trade-off to services provided to
Right.
the majority of Oregon.
Right. No, I'm just getting my...
Yeah, no, I understand that.
Putting myself in the mind of Greg
Right.
Harriman, who's the attorney for the union.
Yeah. So the union.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, you could ask Tim too. He's even better versed in the politics of all this than I am. But yes, that's where the pressure may be coming from. One more.
What are the legal obstacles to making these changes?
Right. So I said, I see three silos here. One is the technical, and I would say if you sit down with technicians say, this is the answer. Yeah, most people agree. Then there's the legal silo. And the emerging consensus, whenever you talk to a lawyer about this, they sort of stare into the sky a little bit. They try to think about the people who are sitting on the Supreme Court right now. They look at what was written during the most recent PERS reform in terms of case history. It's funny just to watch their body language as they about it. What I understand is that there is increasing confidence that changes to the COLA are possible. That as long as individuals, including Mike Bellotti, receive something as a COLA, that would be legally, that would stand legal challenge. In addition, the termination of the money match plan, I think increasingly legal minds are thinking that that is possible also, because it had been stopped before between 1967 and 1969, so there's a precedent for it having been turned off. And then there's this other really little wonky piece. This is graduate school finance now, on this annuity factor of the money match. So the money match program, you end up with this big account in your name, they match it dollar for dollar, and then they say, we're going to turn it into annuity, and the big question is, what interest rate do we use? A bigger interest rate delivers a bigger benefit. They typically use this 8% return rate. If you went to an insurance company in the private market and asked for an annuity, they would give you 3 right now.
They won't even give you that.
Yeah.
Depends on your age.
Yeah, it depends on the age, exactly. And so, lots of legal folks have looked at that particular change and said, we see no reason why that could not, why that wouldn't stand up. Because there is nothing in statute that said they have to use 8% as the annuity factor. Now, the trick on that one, primarily, well, aside from politics, is implementation. Because the minute you announce that it's going to happen, you end up with a lot of rush to the door to retire.
Yep.
Oh, are you going to let me in?
I did just want to say, it's so complicated. Entering my 20th year teaching, and putting that into context too, that the average payout for the average career recipient is $2,400 a month, not the
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, exactly. So you have a lot of part-time employees, some people that have only worked a few years in the system, et cetera. This isn't all Mike Bellotti's. And again, I would never characterize the PERS beneficiaries as the problem. They worked hard, they didn't understand the money match rules better than anybody else, and showed up upon retirement and received a calculation and were pleasantly surprised. They were not on the PERS board, they were not in the legislature, most of them were not in the legislature. So I don't bring any blame to the people that have ended up in the system. It's the folks